Zoe Gardiner is an independent immigration expert, and she joins me now without anybody sitting on the other side of the table shouting about how we should deploy giant hovercrafts or possibly electric cattle prods on the front of big boat. I don't know. 10:49 is the time. Zoe, I'm going to hand the floor to you, if that's all right, and you can talk us all through what you heard yesterday in Suella Braverman's speech and what you thought most significant and what you think the ramifications are for either of the two major parties.
Thanks so much, James. Thanks for having me. I mean, I've got to say, it really is a great opportunity when you don't have to be just sort of shouting to make your point and be heard and actually get into the detail of this, because I think that's what British public deserve. And we deserve a whole lot better than what we got in that speech yesterday, Suella Braverman's Tory conference speech, which wasn't really the speech of a Home Secretary. It was a pitch for the leadership of the Tory party. But it benefited from the advantage of being Home Secretary, which means that she didn't have to address things that normally a candidate for the leadership would. So, for example, the longest NHS waiting times in our history, the fact that workers in the NHS were out on strike again this week, the fact that the cost of living is spiraling. These are the issues that, you know, we would expect a hopeful for the leadership of the country to be addressing and talking about. But instead, of course, she focused her whole speech on talking about migration and demonizing migrants. So she opened it in this really despicable way. I think we've got a clip.
One of the most powerful forces reshaping our world is unprecedented mass migration. The wind of change that carried my own parents across the globe in the 20th century was a mere gust compared to the hurricane that is coming. Because today, the option of moving from a poorer country to a richer one is not just a dream for billions of people. It is an entirely realistic prospect. Now, that could go down in history as the ultimate statement of pulling up the ladder behind you, couldn't it? This is a woman who is speaking with no sense of irony whatsoever, in the exact same way that people and politicians spoke about her parents' generation when they moved to the UK. And in fact, we should look at that, because we look back on the Ugandan Asians who came to the UK when they were driven out by Idi Amin. We look at the Windrush generation who came to the UK after the World War II and helped us to rebuild. And we look back on that and say that was brilliant. We built a future for this country that was worth having. We built the welfare state. We built the NHS. We did all of that with the help of those migrants together. But at the time, those migrants faced the exact same rhetoric from politicians, just like Suella Braverman, right? We were being told at the time that it was very dangerous, that everybody from the Commonwealth, especially the black ones, were likely to come to the UK, and that we would then be overwhelmed and our infrastructure wouldn't be able to cope, and that we would no longer be, of course, a white country. And that was what was behind it then, and it's what's behind it now again. So what we need to do to fight back against this rhetoric is recognize that when the Windrush generation came, and when the Ugandan Asians came, and when Suella Braverman's parents came here, what we did with those migrants is we worked together to build huge infrastructure projects that made this country so much better for everybody, right? And we needed to do that. And we could do it again, but not under this government, not under this Tory government, because this government has shown us that they are completely against the idea of investing in the infrastructure that we need. Whether this isn't about migration, this is about the simple needs of the future for this country. We need to build infrastructure. The Tories have fallen short by 100,000 homes on their own paltry targets for house building in the last year. They've fallen short year on year on their targets for building houses. They've just been announcing, their big announcement from this conference is that they're scrapping half of HS2. These are big infrastructure projects that this country needs to invest in order to be fit for the future. And what Suella Braverman is telling us here is she's not only signaling to the racist elements in our society, who I think are actually very few, much fewer than in Enoch Powell's day.
Do you?
I think she's saying that right. Dream smaller.
Yeah, well, Rory Stewart this morning has suggested there's 20 to 25% of populations in Northern Europe who are susceptible to this sort of rhetoric. So, I mean, that's the gamble, that's the calculation. I'd hope you turn out to be right, and then I suppose other people will hope that Suella Braverman turns out to be right, and that constituency will grow. But what do you say to people who are not racist, but who are troubled by the pictures that she paints, and they are very intoxicating, they are very seductive pictures, which is why, you know, Enoch Powell's name is still very much on the lips of politicians and pundits, and why Suella Braverman's rhetoric is so reminiscent of his.
Well, I think that that's the vast majority of people in this country, right? I mean, the vast majority of people in this country are decent, they're warm, they're welcoming, they want to help refugees, they accept that migration is good for the country, but they want to feel a sense of control. Yes. They don't want to hear these insane, massive numbers being
we've given up on numbers. It's hurricanes now. Hurricanes tsunamis,
now, exactly.
Nuclear explosions of immigrants.
The paranoia that goes with this, and the fear that it's intended to generate, is intended to make you think that this is the biggest issue in the country, not the NHS, not the cost of living. Actually, you should go out and you should vote at the next election based on the possibility of these scary numbers of foreigners coming, when the reality is, right? I mean, she talks about an increase in migration there. Actually, globally, about 3.5% of the population of the whole world is a migrant. That's pretty steady over the past decade. Right? We've not seen a significant increase. And the vast majority of migration happens within countries and within regions. And what we do in the UK is we actually stifle that. So we have deals made with African countries to control their borders, and erect detention centres and lock people up who are trying to cross their borders. Those are the same African countries that have in the African Union Constitution the intention to move towards freedom of movement for African citizens between their borders. So we actively work against the kind of migration that works best, which is regional circular migration around the world.
We've abolished it for ourselves, and we work against it elsewhere in the world. What else? I don't want to run out of time, Zoe. What else caught your ear yesterday?
Well, I think that it was really interesting when she turned her fire on Keir Starmer at the end, and I think we've got another clip there.
The British people have no enthusiasm for Sir Keir Starmer. They know that he believes in nothing. They know that he will say anything to anyone and then change his mind at the first sign of trouble. Keir Starmer lacks the personality to lead this country effectively. Imagine what would happen if he became Prime Minister. Luxury beliefs would reign supreme. Britain would go properly woke.
I do worry when I imagine what would happen if Keir Starmer becomes Prime Minister, as I think is likely that he will. And I think that insult will have really stung because I think that there's some truth to it. I think he does lack a bit of that vision and a bit of that personality that people want. And I think those people that we were talking about, James, those people who make up the majority of Britain who are decent, they want something to believe in. So I really hope that what a Labour government will do is not just what they've set out so far, which is the basic bare bones of a decent system. You have an asylum system, you process people's claims quickly, you don't keep them banged up in barges and hotels, you move them through the system, you protect refugees. That's the basics, and that's great, right? But actually, that's also the system we had that led us to this Brexit, to this Trumpization of our politics that led us to Suella Braverman. So they also need to think bigger and think further and look at, actually, one of the things that Braverman was right about was to question the Refugee Convention, not in the way that she did it, but in the sense that it has been, we have left it as people who believe in protecting people around the world. We've left it. We've said, we've got that in place. My gosh, let's just hold that steady. And actually, we need to go much further. We need to recognize that far from what she's saying about these absurd numbers that are all made up, most people could never obtain protection under the Refugee Convention. They don't qualify. But lots of those people will have good reason to move anyway, whether that's because it's the best survival strategy in the face of climate change, whether it's about finding work and moving around to find better opportunities for the future. All of those things we don't actually provide for. And that's what's created these uncontrolled routes of migration happening. So Labour needs to take that seriously and address the needs of that population.
It's very hard to pick things that highlight much of or enforce much of what you're saying, and I forget which one it was, but there was a Conservative Party politician this week urging us all to have more children. So sort of bizarrely recognising the need for much of what you've just described, but concluding that the solution is to encourage people to have children that they currently don't want to have. It's incredible.
Yeah,
right?
it's fun that we're full and we can't take any more until it comes to, controlling the reproductive rights of, quote unquote, our women. Of course, the right women. Not the poor women who need benefits to support their children.
No, down with them.
A very small group of women need to be providing these kids for our future.
More and more children until the point where they can't afford to have any more children, at which point if they accidentally have another child, of course, they won't get any help or support from the state for them. I just need to clarify a couple of things. Do you have a second home in Tuscany?
I don't have a second home in Tuscany.
Because I was told by the Home Secretary yesterday that everyone who has a problem with her rhetoric and policies must have a second home in Tuscany. And
well, I think if we look at who's more likely to have second homes, it's probably the Tory politicians we've got right now, or the billionaires who have got richer over the last 10 years of Tory governments in this country, whereas the rest of us have all been getting poorer.
And the final question is, do you know what a luxury belief is, Zoe Gardiner?
I think a luxury belief is the belief that we don't need to tax corporations any higher. A luxury belief is the belief that we don't need to tax inheritance or wealth. That's the kind of luxury belief that the luxury class actually hold. And a human rights belief is one that we're all equal, that we should all stand together and we can all build something bigger for our future, and we need to invest in that.
I've enjoyed listening to you, and I've enjoyed it even more than I would have done if there'd been somebody else on the other side of the studio shouting about, I don't know, Jewish space lasers or whatever the rhetoric of the week may be.